The jury are being brought in, and while we won't hear the reading of the verdict, we're going to get a real-time report from our field producer, John Cowley, who is sitting in the gallery, and so he is going to send us an email. So we're going to know, we're going to tell you what the decision is, and then you're going to hear the judge read all the verdict, all of the verdict form on every single count. There are 20 counts total on this one. The judge will read everything live. The foreperson is reading the verdict, or about to, yes, okay, about to read the verdict now. Okay, here we go. And we're going to try to look at Megan Boswell here closely and see if her body language tells us anything. Megan Boswell is guilty of first-degree murder. Oh boy, and you can see a reaction there, couldn't you? Even if we didn't know that, just her body language, her response, looked like her mouth opened up and then she started covering her face. Guilty of that top count of first-degree murder. That was the biggie. And that's the one that could imprison her for the rest of her life. The jury is going to be making a recommendation on this. After they get done with the reading of the verdict, the court will proceed directly into the sentencing phase. We have the information of the second count now. Guilty on count number 2. Megan Boswell guilty of first-degree murder and guilty of felony murder. That's what we know so far. Covering her mouth. Guilty of count number 3 as well. It looks like she may be starting to cry. Not quite sure here. It's hard to see her eyes covered with those eyeglasses. Megan Boswell is guilty of aggravated child abuse as well. These are the biggies, folks. These top counts are the big ones. They're the crux of the case. First-degree premeditated murder, first-degree murder in perpetration of a felony, the felony being aggravated child abuse. Megan Boswell committing a heinous crime in the murder of her beautiful baby, Evelyn. She's also been found guilty of aggravated child neglect. So I'm looking at the verdict form here, going through all of these, so that would have been count number 5. So we've got first-degree premeditated murder, and we've got some variations of that. We've got straight-up premeditated murder. We've got murder in the perpetration of a felony being aggravated child abuse. And we've got a murder and perpetration of a felony being aggravated child neglect. So she's been found guilty of all 3 of those crimes, as well as aggravated child abuse, aggravated child neglect. The next one is tampering with evidence. She's guilty of that as well, because we know she didn't just commit this crime. She tried to cover it up. The jury has found her guilty of that. The killing of her baby, Evelyn, who was asphyxiated. Asphyxiated. Homicidal violence was how baby Evelyn was taken from this earth at just 15 months of age. She's been found guilty of making a false report, and there are numerous counts of that. I'm counting, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. 11 counts of making false reports. You know, sometimes you will see prosecutors clean up an indictment and proceed on one because all the crimes would merge for sentencing purposes anyway, so a conviction on multiple doesn't really further the ball. But here, no, they went for it. They went for it on every instance where they believe she made one. So we'll continue watching this as the jury foreperson is reading off whether she is guilty or not guilty of these crimes. I want to get some reaction from our legal analyst guest, attorney Matthew Mangino, watching along. Matthew, you called it. You said this was going to be a guilty verdict on first-degree murder. Your thoughts now?
Well, I'm not surprised, Julie, obviously, but if we think back about the evidence in this case, I mean, it's a horrific case. I mean, this is, Evelyn was last seen in late December, and then, the body was found 2 months later. She was suffocated and stuffed into the garbage in Megan's old playhouse on her father's property. This is a 15-month-old child who we also heard from witnesses who wasn't taken care of. She was dirty. She often smelled of urine. So she was neglected before her death, and then she was violently murdered. I'm not surprised that this jury has come back with guilty first-degree murder.
Right, Matthew. And so looking here, it looks like, I'm going to count these as I'm reading them, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 counts of making a false report are what prosecutors brought against Megan Boswell. There was a 12th count. That would be count number 18 in the indictment. They dropped that for whatever reason. It was dropped at the start of the trial. And so we're looking at what would be, let's see now, the next crimes as we're going through, she's been found, they're still reading through all of the crimes of false reporting. And then there's going to be 2 more crimes we have yet to hear about: the abuse of a corpse and the failure to report a death under suspicious circumstances. And that would be this entire indictment here. Again, a lengthy indictment. Prosecutors, okay, so we've got word from our team in the courtroom. She's been found guilty on every single count of making a false report here. Matthew Mangino, that really was the focus. It was really the focus before we knew whether or not she did this murder, right? As we harken back to that time, and I remember it plain as day, because it was a strange time in all of our lives. It was during the pandemic, and right at the start of it, baby Evelyn had gone missing, and then I remember reporting on it when we were all working remotely for Court TV, and it was just like she was portraying herself as a victim to the world, and everybody felt sorry for her. And then, boy, oh boy, did all of that come back to haunt her, didn't it?
Well, it certainly did, and it reminded people who follow cases like this that harkening back to Susan Smith or even Casey Anthony, where you would go out on television, publicly say, help me find my daughter, and cry in front of the cameras. So it had that whole feel to it. And then obviously as the case and investigation unfolded, we learned that it isn't what was portrayed early on by Megan Boswell. So, it had that sort of intrigue to it that unfortunately we've become all too familiar with.
Right, Matthew. And thank you for that analysis. I'm looking at our producer's notes. She's been found guilty of abuse of a corpse and failure to report a death under suspicious circumstances. With that, we can report that Megan Boswell has been found guilty of every single crime she's been accused of by the state of Tennessee in the case of the death of her beautiful daughter, baby Evelyn. Baby Evelyn has gotten justice today in this courtroom in Tennessee, with her mother being held legally accountable for her murder. She should be still alive today. She shouldn't have had her life cut short after 15 months on this earth. Just think about that, 15 months. Baby Evelyn, rest in peace, precious angel. And I believe we should be getting an audio signal at any moment to hear from His Honor, as we had to turn our audio down so that we couldn't hear any members of the jury, in particular the foreperson. But the judge is going to repeat the reading of the verdict. And there may be a polling of the jury, which is pretty standard. We will see. Still no audio signal, but you can see the judge addressing the jury. Okay, everybody's on their feet. Perhaps the jury being taken out. Okay, that's what I'm being told. Being told that the jury is exiting the courtroom for His Honor to do the reading of the verdict. So we're going to hear a repeat of the verdict in the courtroom, and we'll see if we get a view of any visible reaction from Megan Boswell. She looked a little teary-eyed, perhaps hard to see the front of her face. Here we go.
In count 2, a jury of your peers having found you guilty of first-degree murder and the perpetration of a felony, is a judgment of this court you are guilty. In count 3, a jury of your peers having found you guilty of first-degree murder and the perpetration of a felony, it's a judgment of this court you are guilty. In count 4, a judgment of your peers having found you guilty of aggravated child abuse, is a judgment of the court you are guilty. In count 5, a jury of your peers having found you guilty of aggravated child neglect, it's a judgment of the court you are guilty. In count 6, a jury of your peers having found you guilty of tampering with evidence, it's a judgment of the court you are guilty. In count 7, a jury of your peers having found you guilty of false report, it's a judgment of the court you are guilty. In count 8, a jury of your peers having found you guilty of false report, it's a judgment of the court you are guilty. In count 9, a jury of your peers having found you guilty of false report, it's a judgment of the court you are guilty. In count 10, a jury of your peers having found you guilty of false report, it's a judgment of the court you are guilty. In count 11, a jury of your peers having found you guilty of false report, it's a judgment of the court you are guilty. In count 12, a jury of your peers having found you guilty of false report, it's a judgment of the court you are guilty. Count 13, a jury of your peers having found you guilty of false report, it's a judgment of the court you are guilty. Count 14, a jury of your peers having found you guilty of false report, is a judgment of the court you are guilty. In count 15, a jury of your peers having found you guilty of false report, is a judgment of the court you are guilty. In count 16, a jury of your peers having found you guilty of false report, it's a judgment of the court you are guilty. In count 17, a jury of your peers having found you guilty of false report, it's a judgment of the court you are guilty. In count 19, a jury of your peers having found you guilty of abuse of a corpse, it's a judgment of the court you are guilty. And in count 20, a jury of your peers having found you guilty of failure to report a death under suspicious, unusual, or unnatural circumstances, it's a judgment of the court you are guilty. In counts 4 through 20, the jury did not assess a fine, so there'll be no fine assessed in those counts. All right. Now we'll be in recess about 15 minutes.
Thank you. Court stands in recess.
Guilty on all counts. So that is the verdict from the jury in the case against defendant Megan Boswell. She murdered her beautiful 15-month-old daughter, Evelyn. And she put Evelyn's body in a trash can. And there she is crying as she's being led out by a sheriff's deputy to go to the holding area in the courthouse where she will be held. It's like a little jail, a little mini jail is kind of what they look like in courthouses, where all of the prisoners will go and be held while they have their cases before the court. So the judge is taking a quick recess with the jury. They'll be brought back in, and then the sentencing phase will begin. And in this case, because the jury found Megan Boswell guilty of the crime of first-degree murder, they get to make a recommendation. So she's going to do life in prison. That's for certain. The jury gets to recommend whether it is with or without parole. That's what the law in Tennessee says. So we're going to proceed immediately to this second phase of the case. Megan Boswell, now a convicted killer. And today, very swiftly, she will learn her punishment for the murder of baby Evelyn.